The Listen2Read American Adventure Library presents An American President's Adventure in Primitive Brazil and His Disastrous Brush with Death Down the River of Doubt. Through the Brazilian Wilderness by Theodore Roosevelt. Read by Stojka. Preface.
This is an account of a zoographic reconnaissance through the Brazilian hinterland. The official and proper title of the expedition is that given it by the Brazilian government, Expedicio Científica Roosevelt Rondon. When I started from the United States, it was to make an expedition primarily concerned with mammalogy and ornithology for the American Museum of Natural History of New York. This was undertaken under the auspices of Messrs. Osborne and Chapman, acting on behalf of the museum. In the body of this work, I describe how the scope of the expedition was enlarged, and how it was given a geographic as well as a zoological character in consequence of the kind proposal of the Brazilian Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, General Lauro Muller. In its altered and enlarged form, the expedition was rendered possible only by the generous assistance of the Brazilian government. Throughout the body of the work will be found reference after reference to my colleagues and companions of the expedition, whose services to science I have endeavored to set forth, and for whom I shall always feel the most cordial friendship and regard. Theodore Roosevelt, Sagamore Hill, September 1st, 1914.
Chapter 1. The Start.
One day in 1908, when my presidential term was coming to a close, Father Zahn, a priest whom I know, came in to call on me. Father Zahn and I had been cronies for some time because we were both of us fond of Dante and of history and of science, and I'd always commended to theologians his book Evolution and Dogma. He was an Ohio boy, and his early schooling had been obtained in old-time American fashion in a little log school, where, by the way, one of the other boys was Januarius Aloysius McCahan, afterward the famous war correspondent and friend of Skobeloff. Father Zahn told me that McCahan, even at that time, added an utter fearlessness to chivalric tenderness for the weak, and was the defender of any small boy who was oppressed by a larger one. Later, Father Zahn was at Notre Dame University in Indiana with Maurice Egan, whom, when I was president, I appointed minister to Denmark. On the occasion in question, Father Zahn had just returned from a trip across the Andes and down the Amazon, and came in to propose that after I left the presidency, he and I should go up the Paraguay to the interior of South America. Well, at the time I wished to go to Africa, and so the subject was dropped. But from time to time afterward we talked it over. 5 years later, in the spring of 1913, I accepted invitations conveyed through the governments of Argentina and Brazil to address certain learned bodies in these countries. Then it occurred to me that instead of making the conventional tourist trip purely by sea round South America, after I finished my lectures, I could come north through the middle of the continent into the valley of the Amazon, and I decided to write Father Zahn and tell him my intentions. Before doing so, however, I desired to see the authorities of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City to find out whether they cared to have me take a couple of naturalists with me into Brazil and make a collecting trip for the museum. Accordingly, I wrote to Frank Chapman, curator of ornithology at the museum, and accepted his invitation to lunch at the museum one day early in June. After lunch, in addition to various naturalists, to my astonishment, I also found Father Zahn, and as soon as I saw him I told him I was now intending to make the South American trip. It appeared that he had made up his mind that he would take it himself, and had actually come on to see Mr. Chapman to find out if the latter could recommend a naturalist to go with him, and he at once said that he would accompany me. Chapman was pleased when he found out that we intended to go up the Paraguay and across into the valley of the Amazon, because much of the ground over which we were to pass had not been covered by collectors. He saw Henry Fairfield Osborne, president of the museum, who wrote me that the museum would be pleased to send unto me a couple of naturalists, whom with my approval Chapman would choose. The men who Chapman recommended were Messrs. George K. Cherry and Leo E. Miller. I gladly accepted both. The former was
Sample complete. Ready to continue?